Hello, everybody, and welcome to the presentation today, Applicants with Disabilities, Unknown Barriers and Poor Applicant Experience. The purpose of today's webinar is why accessibility and accommodations are important to your online presence, how effective is your online accommodation statement and process, and then I'm going to go over a study I did with the top 100 diversity companies that were listed in the year I did this, which was just a few years ago, and to show you what I had found out specifically as it relates to accommodations and the statement, etc. So that is going to be some fun information, and I will share those research findings, and from those findings, a solution for everything I'm going to talk today. Get your pens and paper ready because I will have some things you can implement right away. I will give you some food for thought of how you may want to approach certain things, and I'm also going to give you some homework that you can find out by the information I am discussing today on how well your company is doing, and you can find out right away. So we'll talk to you about that. So just a quick little infomercial. HirePotential has been around since 1990, servicing companies regarding the inclusion of people with disabilities. We have a staffing side of our business as well as an outsource side of the business, and we focus on accommodations, specifically assistive technology, not only to implement it into the organization for individual, but also providing training and IT support for assistive technology. We also have applicant accommodation call center support, web accessibility and remediation. So we do audits, we teach accessibility internally for your IT folks, as well as doing any remediation for video, PDF documents, etc. We also provide lots of different training on disability as it relates to recruiting, hiring, and retaining people with disabilities in your organization. As I said earlier, we have a staffing and recruiting component where we only focus on recruiting and hiring people with disabilities, and consulting depending on what's needed. And then, of course, the incentive piece is tax credit administration. So with that, let's move on and let's talk about why you should care about the barriers. Now, I know a lot that I'm going to talk about today. It's going to be my guess that you had no idea. And that's really what I want to convey, because I get a lot of questions of people saying, hey, Sheridan, where can we find people? You know, we're just not getting them. Nobody's self-IDing. Oh, no, our accommodation line, nobody's calling it. Well, there are reasons for that. And when someone says to me, no one's calling the accommodation line, and you're actively recruiting somebody, that's a problem. And I'm going to talk more about that. So why this is important is obviously compliance. I'm assuming most of you are OFCCP government contractors, right? Federal contractors, and being audited. And then if you're not, you still have EEOC issues. So everything I'm going to cover is going to help both sides of the spectrum of what's going on with disability and providing some solutions for you. How to embrace and provide an inclusive culture for everyone. Expanding your talent pool. Being the competitive edge. Do you want to be a compliant, just in compliant, or do you want to be competitive, which is going beyond compliance? Minimizing your risk and exposure and maximizing the amount of talent coming in. Having the candidate, we know that we can't hire everybody, but we want to make sure that our applicants are having a positive experience. That's really important, because down the road, if they did and your jobs open some more, they'll come back to reapply and hopefully they will be hired. So these things are very important to customers on this call, especially your branding. That is really important. And having a positive applicant experience is very important and something that most companies are focused on. And then, the incentives. There are so many incentives on average, and I can say this for me personally. On the staffing side, on average, we get about $3,000 per hire from all the incentives if you know how to do them and get them. So you actually can be paid to hire qualified talent with disabilities. So that's something to look at as well. So a lot of you know all this already, but this is just to set the platform and the difference of what OFCCP is looking at as well as EEOC. And OFCCP had a directive, which I'm going to go over, the online applicant systems they know are not accessible, so they wanted you to put a statement on there that people can contact you to help apply to jobs. They also have, as we all know, the voluntary self-ID form, which I know a lot of you are struggling. Some companies are doing okay, but for most of us, we're struggling. We're not getting close to the 7% utilization goal. I have some ideas on that as well. Accommodations, they're looking at accommodations, and now with the focused audit, it all came down. Craig Lean is coming out left and right telling what to expect. These are things to expect. Looking at your accommodation process, what are you actually doing there, and is it solving the issues quickly, and do you have a process in place, which we'll cover as well. And also outreach. You got to prove it. You got to make sure you've got results. I will tell you that I know that in the audits that I do for companies to help them with the disability piece, they continue to use partners that aren't getting results. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which I'm going to talk about. And this is something that OFCCP is going to challenge you on. If you have a partner that you've had since 2014 and you haven't shown any results, they're going to ask you, why are they still your partner? Why are you, they're not doing anything. This is all to move the needle forward. So you're going to be challenged to that. EEOC on the other side is looking at your definition, right? We all have the same old definition, and it was expanded to include in a more specific way people with disabilities and our veterans. So they're going to be, EEOC looks at that. They're also looking at accommodations. Now, they've taken on accommodations in a very aggressive way, and they're really the folks that are putting the law enforcement on this. OFCCP can too, but if you look at their stats, they're very minimal. They're just basically letting EEOC do their piece. So they're going to be looking at policy procedure, the interactive process, equal opportunity for all. OFCCP is looking at, and EEOC, are all resumes flowing equally? So these are things that you already know. And this is not a slide to read. This is just a slide to show you that all these settlements, failure to hire, these are all, a variety of different disability things. They're out there, they're to the public, it's happening. And then a failure to accommodate. Accommodations have risen, tripled over the last couple years on ADA and specifically website, which we'll talk about. And here is a specific lawsuit that I pulled out to show you exactly that this, if you look at the arrows to the left, the red arrows, you can see it says defendant online job application system inaccessible to blind individuals. This is happening. A lot of people think that, oh, well, we have an accommodation statement and we can, it will be okay. Well, I'm going to uncover some things for you today as to the best practice, the least minimal risk, and the best for the company to get the most candidates into your job pool. So we're going to talk about this, but I really wanted to show you this is happening, and these are the lawsuits that are happening left and right now. To give you an example, Surfarth and Shaw has been doing presentations last quarter and the first quarter. They did a study just to see what's happening in the lawsuits. Well, these lawsuits, although it's not a federal law that websites have to be accessible, judges aren't waiting, and they now see that it's under the ADA Title III. And just you need to think about it like just as the physical doors of the ADA of 1990 had to be accessible, now it's relating to the virtual doors have to be accessible. Because if you think about this, what do we do online? We go shopping, we do our banking, right? We apply to jobs. it's all public and it's all services. So it's coming over, and it is really a trend right now that we're seeing. And as you can see, over 1 year, the increase of lawsuit accessible websites has gone up 177%. Here's another one, the top states, New York, Florida, Pennsylvania, you can see, and there's even a better slide that I have here on the next slide, where you have California, New York, and Florida. I can say for California, there is a state law as well, and that is the Unruh law. So they have not only the federal, Title III, but also a state law that all public websites have to be accessible. So this is kind of where we're seeing the activity and what's going on, the reason why these states is there's a high level of folks with disabilities that are advocates that are making these claims. So it's just in the areas of where people are showing up and filing these lawsuits. Not to say that every state, is not going to have lawsuits. They certainly are, but this is the greatest amount. So I wanted to go back on the directive I stated earlier that was actually put out July 10th of 2008. And this is when OFCCP came out with the directive saying, hey guys, we know most of us now are using online systems for recruiting to track our data and our resumes, and we also know that these applicant tracking systems are not accessible, which is a barrier. Now, I'm talking digital accessibility, and you may or may not understand what that is, and I hope to kind of help you through that as I go through this presentation a little bit. But basically, it means that someone who may be using some sort of assistive technology, for an example, someone who is blind who uses a screen reader, if the coding is not correct in your website from your homepage to your third parties' pages to submittal, people can't apply to your jobs. It's like having a locked door and I can't get through to be able to utilize the rest of the house. So it's like locked door panels. And so what OFCCP asked the contractors is, okay, give people information that if your doors are locked, there's no way to get in, then give them the availability of contacting you. So you've got to have a fax, phone, email, something for them to rely on so that they can communicate to you. And these are two examples that I've used in the past. And the most important thing here is really that you have an email, a fax. I know it's the 21st century, but people still use fax, and a phone number. Very, very important. And this is your homework. I want you all to, when you do this, I want you to go find your accommodation statement. I want you to time yourself. I want you to say, okay, it's 12 noon and I'm going to find my accommodation statement and I'm going to email it and call it. But don't be you. Be somebody else. Because last week I gave a presentation and this was part of my presentation, and I asked the group to do the challenge, and one gal was in there with her laptop, and so she reached out to her accommodation and said, hey, I'm just checking to see how, I'm applying for a job, whatever. And they go, oh, hi, Sue, I see you. Yeah, no problem, we got it. Well, she came as herself and she's the boss. Well, that to me wasn't a really good, valid approach to do the testing. So I want you to come in as an anonymous person, as a phone call, an email, and see what your response is. And be a candidate and see how your team is actually responding to candidates. Because I'll tell you, OFCCP is already doing this as well as the EOC. And they already know before, if you're one of the people having a focus audit, they already know. So if that experience is pretty bad, and what I've seen in some companies where they'll say they just have an email and they say, oh, we'll get back to you in 72 hours. My question to you, is that equal? How does that feel if you had to respond that way, right? Not good. So this is really imperative and really important. Also, where is this on your pages? People have it buried in the diversity section. It's not up front and out loud on the home page or career page. Because you got to remember, if you are not accessible and someone hears about your company and you're recruiting people with disabilities, they may get the career URL, they may not. For most cases, most people just type in the company's name, get the home page to find out about the company. But if it's not accessible, they'll never know how to get a hold of you because they can't access the pages behind the locked door. So you've got to put it on your home page, very easy. Your IT people need to know how to code this correctly so that people can get to you. If they can't, you're going to go back to see those EEOC cases, which is what's happening, and you might be on that docket. So you really have to pay attention to this. You really have to make sure your IT people are knowing how important this is. Even if you're not a government contractor, this is important because this falls under EEOC, right, under the ADA. Very, very important. So let me ask you guys a question. When do most people apply to jobs? Do you think it's the morning, during the day, in the evening? Well, most people apply in the evening. So I want to show you this diagram. Now, I've had this diagram around for a long time. I started talking about this diagram in 2014 when we got the utilization 7% goals. And I still have to train on this because it's something that people don't realize. So this is a barrier. So the minute someone hits your site, if you don't know if you're accessible, and by the way, don't ask if it's 508. I'll teach you today on what to ask. But if you let me give you this example. Let's call Mr. Blue. He doesn't need an accommodation. He comes to your site. He's a software engineer, okay? And he hears about your jobs. He goes, he looks, and goes to your home page, to your website, goes to the career page, reads all about it, submits his resume, and he's done. Let's say that's an hour. Mrs. Gray, who's also a software engineer, comes in at the same time, but she needs an accommodation. And they both came in on the weekend or in the evening. Ms. Gray, right the minute she hits your website, it's a systemic issue because she can't apply like Mr. Blue. Resumes do not flow equally in the accommodation process unless it's in real time and they are serviced like everybody else in real time. Now, I know a lot of you are like, uh-oh. Because most of you, if you even have someone manning that phone, let's say Miss Gray comes in, she gets a friend to help because she can't find it because your home page isn't accessible. It's nowhere on the home page. She gets a friend to help, and they finally find the statement, makes a phone call and says, hi, this is Ajax Company. Thank you for calling. We'll get back to you in 72 hours. Please leave your contact information. Well, that again is not in real time. She has to wait 72 hours. Meanwhile, Mr. Blue is already being seen. The recruiter does their search. They have their resume. Miss Gray is not. OFCCP is going to pick this up. So this is an area that's really important. The other thing that's important, let's say you have an accommodation line, you have someone manning that phone. The question is, do they know they're manning that phone? And are they trained? Are they trained to handle a customer with a disability? For an example, do they know what a relay call is? Would they know how to talk to someone that might have a hard time being understood, having a speech issue? Would they understand someone who might have post-traumatic stress that pauses and there's a lot of white space? Would they be patient? Have they been trained? The second thing is, Another issue, is it available 24/7? I know right now 100% of you, it is not available 24/7. And this is a problem because people can apply online 24/7 no matter where they are in the world. But we don't offer that for people with disabilities. That is a systemic issue. Resumes do not flow equally. So, this is an area that you must think about. The other thing is you will have to always be accessible and you will always have to have an accommodation process. So you have to have both. It's not one or the other. Because even if you're accessible, someone might instead want an accommodation to get assistance to walk them through the process. And then there's reporting. So right here, everything I stated, we have two issues, and now we have reporting because if you're taking that call, you're going to have some type of documentation that you took the call and what was happening in that call, and then all that has to be inputted. So these are areas that I hope I'm kind of giving you a aha that this is what's happening, and we have to work on these issues. One, if we really are looking for qualified people, you see how many locked doors we have here? If you are spending money and you're not getting people, some of your own processes are holding you back. You might have a partner that is finding and fielding you resumes, but once they scrape your jobs and go onto your site, you're not accessible anymore. It's a locked door. So you've got to think about the process from A to Z and find out where your barriers are. And I know I'm listing them right now for you. So these are things that you can put into action to go find out right now. So here's a study that I told you about that I did, and it was a couple years back. And basically, when the accommodation statement came out and I started doing some research on that, and I started asking my clients, hey, since this new directive and all, how's the accommodation process gone? Have you gotten calls or people? Oh, no, it's been pretty quiet. That got me thinking, going, I don't understand if we're actually aggressively recruiting people. I know people need accommodations. That phone should be having some sort of activity. That just makes sense, right? So I decided I'm going to do a study, and I picked the top diversity companies that were winning awards in diversity. I felt if they were not doing it, then that would really tell me everybody's really in trouble here, because these companies at least have been having awards and they got acknowledged, and so that's kind of what I based this study on. So I picked 100 companies, and the things that we were looking at is, one, did they have an accommodation statement on their website? Where was it? The career page and home page. I looked at the contact information. Did they have a phone, fax, email? I also looked at their communication response. Did someone pick up the phone? Did they email me back? Was it automation? Were they knowledgeable? Did they have training on disability? What was the experience that we had? What was our applicant experience? And the ultimate goal was how many resumes did we actually get help on to submit? Now, that was my goal to look at. So here's what we found. 57% did not have an accommodation statement anywhere. Now, I will tell you, these are government contractors, okay? So they should have had this, right? That's a must. It was nowhere to be found, 57%. So please go to your website. See if you have one. If it's buried, get it out of the buried part and put it out loud and up front. Yes, you might have some struggle with the website people. I hear that all the time. Oh, our web people, da, 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 da. Well, this has to be something that you have to get your higher levels to push on. This is very critical for so many reasons. 32% had it had an accommodation statement, but it was so buried. 31%, so only 1% was it on the exact, easy to find career page, but 31% was so buried. We spent hours trying to find it. We couldn't find it, and so it was almost like saying, "Yeah, we have to do this, but we really don't want you to call." That's the perception when it's buried and you can't find it. Okay, so perception, your brand, very important here. Only 11% of the 100 had it on their homepage. So that was a lot higher than I even thought. A lot of people don't even think to put it on the homepage. So I was actually pretty happy about that. I like it higher, but to even have a percentage on there, I was happy to see that. So let's look at the contact information. So as I said earlier, you need a phone, fax, and email, right? Well, 17% of the 57, now remember, 43% had nothing of this 100. So of the 57%, 17% had an email, 7% had a phone number, and 19% had both. Okay? Now, we called these numbers, and this is exactly what I want you to do of your own organization. Audit yourself. Find out what's the experience. So of the 57%, and those that had the email, which was the phone number, was 7%. So we're talking 7% of 57%. 26% answered, which is about maybe 1 to 2 people. They answered the phone. 18% had a voicemail, and 8% was in real time. So 8% of 57% to 7%. So you can see how small these numbers are. And then trained, nobody was trained. No one knew how to talk to us. I'm going to give you some examples here in the next few slides. We have 2% here, but actually it was one person that was in HR, didn't know how to service us, was very apologetic, very kind and all that, but said we'd have to get back. I really don't know what to do, and but had no disability etiquette experience. So in real time, here is what some examples are of the conversations we had. So we would call the accommodation line, and we got this. The only way you can apply for a job is go through our website. We have no way of sending you a list of current openings. There is someone there that can help you fill out the online CV form for you. Now let me ask you, you're adults. Do you have someone helping you? No, we're independent. We don't want help. Neither do people with disabilities, and they shouldn't. The other thing is this person kept sending us back to the website. Here's another one. One person asked us, what's an accommodation? This was the accommodation line. And when we called, we need an accommodation, we have a disability, we need help to apply, they didn't even know what accommodation meant. Wow, right? Third, you are the first person that has called this number with this issue. This person was blind. The candidate, the applicant was blind. I do not know how I can help you since your career site only accepts online applications. Can I take down your name, number, and have an HR specialist call you back? We said sure, and guess what? No one called us back. These are issues that are wowing, and we're only talking a few years ago. This is not like 20 years ago. One website, one person that answered the phone kept saying, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Go back to the website and apply. And we kept saying, we can't. We're blind. It's not accessible. We can't access the information. Well, I'm sorry. You need to go back to the website and apply. That's the only way you can apply. I can't help you. That was the response we got. And this was a government contractor that's been a government contract for eons. 7 of the 8 asked for a phone number to have someone call us back next week. Only one company called us back. And that one company couldn't even offer assistance. They didn't know what to do with us. They asked us to explain what the problem was. They didn't have a clue. So if you are actively recruiting people and you're out there with your brand and you're going to job fairs and you're doing virtual job fairs and you're saying who you are and what you do and that you're looking for qualified candidates with disabilities, you've got to know etiquette and communication. You've got to make sure that their experience is positive and that they have a sense of belonging, that you value them. This information, oh my goodness, and first impressions are everything, right? And I know a lot of you probably have not thought about this. You've thought about internal stuff like getting your recruiters trained on disability etiquette. You may or may not have started training your hiring managers, which I highly recommend. You're not thinking of some of the systemic issues and all of this going on, and these are happening every day. So I hope this is helpful. Now, I'm going to go back here. I kind of showed my cards already, but out of all of this, the number one goal was to get resumes submitted, right? And I really truly thought we'd get 10%. That was what I was hoping. And the actual number was 0. We couldn't even get past the front door, you guys. We couldn't even get anybody to spend any time with us to walk us through the process. And that's the whole purpose of an accommodation line. So please, please, please find out what's happening there. You're not getting calls, you probably are, and they're gone. And you have a huge exposure and a horrible candidate experience. And I know you don't want that. And I know a lot of you on this call are doing a lot of great stuff and making efforts to move the needle forward, to embrace people with talent, with disabilities. So all your work, and then this is happening, it just deflates what your efforts are, and they don't get seen, and they don't even matter because people have this first experience. So you want to make sure that you want to take a look at this. Make sure that you have everything in place. Make sure that you're responsive. Remember, real time. Resumes need to flow equally. And you might say, well, Sheridan, there's no way we can do all this. It's too labor intensive. It's too this, that. Yep, probably so. And there is solutions, but I also say it takes one lawsuit, right? Just one lawsuit or someone making a statement and going to EEOC will cost your company minimum $50,000, regardless of the outcome, regardless how long it is. The minute it becomes an EEO complaint, your company's going to spend $50,000, minimal, because of the attorneys and everybody involved and all the legwork that has to be put in there and the time to respond. So solutions are so much cheaper than $50,000, and I'm going to tell you about them. So the things that you have to do. Now, this is also for the focused audits, so this will help you. There's a compliance piece of this and a competitive piece. But what I will tell you from a compliance piece and a competitive piece and what you need to do right now and get this in the budget, get this done today, get it in your plan, because if you're one of the companies, of the 500 companies that are doing focused audits, this should already be done. So here's the plan of action. These are the musts. You must audit your website from a home page to submittal on your recruiting steps and your pages. And yes, that's even the third party. And yes, you are accountable to your third party, right? The third party could have exposure, but you are the one that's being audited. So get this audit done. Find out where you stand, and then you can put a plan together. The one thing that OFCCP really likes is that you're proactive and that you already know some of the barriers and the issues, and you're already putting a plan in place, and they see the ball moving down the court. So this is imperative. And don't know what you don't know. And I would say, please do not rely on someone to say, oh, your website's accessible. I will tell you, a lot of folks are buying a product. I'm not going to mention the product, but it's a layover of your site, and it says, oh, it's accessible. It is not. A screen reader cannot access your site. It's a Band-Aid approach. It doesn't work. The only way to get things accessible is that if you build the coding within your application design stuff. That is the only way. So you still have exposure. It takes away some things like color coding and color contrast, but it is not accessible. So please don't rely on that. Also, make your third parties accountable. When you're re-signing contracts, get procurement involved. Get them to put in that they need to be the regulations, which is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 AA. Now, most companies are not, we just came out with the new, it was always 2.0, which 2.0 still applies. 2.1 is just an add-on for mobile. Now, I know a lot of you, we know this in recruiting. Mobile has become one of the #1 platforms in people applying to jobs. So this may be you, and you need to get your mobile. If you have your own mobile app, that too needs to be assessed, okay? I would say in your procurement guidelines as a whole, I think it's really hard for vendors right now to comply to 2.1 because it just came out within the last 9 months, and they can't keep up. But I do think you should hold them to the standard of 2.0. That's been around for a while, and it's something that must be, and then later down the road, maybe a couple years, that you do go to 2.1. But you got to stop the inaccessibility now, and the way to do that is in your procurement. And so you definitely want this type of an assessment. It's not, you don't want an assessment that's automated. Automated only gets 30% of accessibility. So when someone says, oh, I can do it free for you, or it's only going to cost this much, for the most part, they're just doing the automation, and they're not using assistive technology that people use, like screen readers, and there are 2 top screen readers, magnification, voice activation, keyboarding. They have to do the manual test to this. So there is some meat behind it, and if you're getting a cheap audit, you're not getting an audit. So be careful of that, and I know a lot of you may not know that. So hopefully I'm helping you to get the right people to do the audits for you. Also have a plan. You're going to have a plan internally as well as probably outsourcing. Some companies, I think the most important thing is training. Who's going to be the ones looking at your public sites to make sure they're accessible? And in this case, in this presentation, really the recruiting piece. So your internal people you might outsource an auditing. You want to audit it once a year. OFCCP is going to want to know about that. They want to make sure that you're keeping everybody on their toes. You might want to put a plan in place for your third party, get them accountable. Don't rely on your third party's testing. Okay? You have to do it from a reliable source. I have been one that has been burned by that back in the 90s. Where I relied on a company that said that they were going to make our product accessible. Once we were in beta testing, spent hours and $50,000 on an applicant tracking system back then. And when we did the testing, in the contract it said it would be accessible, but the product was not. They did not develop it. So they told me what I wanted to hear, but didn't do what I asked them to do. I got rid of that contractor. I lost $50,000, but it was on principle. And I'm a company that only recruits and hire people with disabilities, and I was dumbfounded that happened. So I'm telling you from experience to make sure that you are putting your own processes in place to protect you and not rely on a third party to analyze their own software, okay? So the plan is training, remediate your policies and procedures, especially on accessibility. Now, a lot of you are probably going, well, I don't do that. No, you don't. But if you're a part of recruiting and compliance, you are a part of this. You've got to educate your folks to get this moving forward. And then, of course, procurement. And in procurement, there's a voluntary product accessibility template that you can ask for someone. If you've got new products coming in, new software, ask a third party to assess that software. Again, don't ask for the company for their VPAT, because they usually make it sound really good because they don't want you to know. And that's been okay in the past. Just recently at a conference in March at the CSUN conference, the federal government said they know that a lot of VPATs, they're using the word fraud, and this is really imperative because they've never used that word before. So again, use third parties to do your accessibility assessments, etc. All right, the benefits of this: you're being proactive for both OFCCP and EEOC. You're going to find out the issues before they're an issue. You're going to put a plan in together before you're audited, and that's going to look great in front of both OFCCP and EEOC. You're going to minimize your risk and liability. You're going to determine a plan and how to move forward. You're going to have consistent audits. You're going to come up with a plan, whether you do it internally or externally or outsource it. You're going to improve your customer experience, right? That candidate experience. That says a mouthful. We have social media today. Our brands are really important to us, and people's experience when they touch our company and our brand is really important, whether they're a customer, a candidate. It doesn't matter. We want to make sure that people are having good, positive experience. You're going to have improved results. More people will be coming to be able to access your information. You'll get more people into your database. You'll have more candidates applying. You'll know your numbers. You'll know where they're coming from, right? If you have 5 different partners, you're going to ask, how did you learn of us? Oh, well, I used Getting Hired. And you're going to know that Getting Hired is helping supply people, and that is working for you. So you'll have more information, better results. It's universal access. So when I say that, just as the physical doors, had to be accessible, so do the virtual doors. Another example here is the curb cutouts. We all know about the curb cutouts back in 1990 when ADA came out. We noticed all the curbs being cut out for wheelchairs to be able to access the driveway or the driveways or sidewalks. And if you think about curb cutouts now, who uses those? Well, we all do, right? Moms and dads with strollers, me, marketing, sales, with all my tchotchke stuff, I have a roller bag. I use those. The FedEx guy. That, although it was started as a disability accommodation, it became access for all of us to make our life easy. Same with your cell phones. If you look at if anybody has, you look at your phone, you have voice activation, right? We can talk to our phone. Thank someone with a disability, because that's how that was created. We have magnification too on our phones, where, for those of us who are baby boomers that are started using our granny glasses, we do the pinch so we can see. That's magnification. Thank someone with a disability, because that happened way back when, before it became universal access. These things, although they started with a disability accommodation, look how these things have helped us, right? It's universal access. And that's how I need you to think about this, is that when you make things accessible and accommodating, you're going to have more access to more people. And it's not just people with disabilities. It's their advocates. It's their family and friends. They want to come work for companies who get it, because they know that their friend or their family member with a disability, specifically an obvious disability, takes 10 times more interviews to get an opportunity than the average person. And they want to support those companies. So that was the solution on accessibility. The solution on accommodations, you want to make sure about your statement. So I gave you some homework to look at. I think I've covered that pretty in depth of what you need to do and where you need to fix. Then training. You got to train everybody. You've got to train your recruiters. You got to train your hiring managers. And you got to train your coworkers. They're going to be working aside of people with disabilities. Your managers are going to be managing people with disabilities, and your recruiters obviously are the first line of contact for the most of folks coming in, and your support staff. And it has to be consistent. And I'd say for all these trainings, they all have some flavor of etiquette and sensitivity, but they have to wear the hat of what that person's daily job is, or they won't get it. So you've got to put the recruiter's hat on when you're training for recruiting. You've got to put the manager's hat on and put that training together. And there is some synergy, but we've got to speak their language for them to get it and to be more sensitive around these issues and more aware. Also, some knowledge, basic knowledge of assistive technology of what people use. Having training on that and training consistently, not just every 5 years, but it is part of a mandated training. Now, a lot of you say, well, we can't mandate that. Well, I say you should, specifically with what's going on in the lawsuits and all. It's really showing us that people really aren't educated in disability, and a lot of people just feel, oh, that's just an HR issue. It is not anymore, right? It's a hiring, most of the lawsuits, once we hire someone, it's the hiring manager that got us in trouble because they didn't have any training and they did the wrong thing, right? So we need to have this as the fabric of our culture. Disability training needs to be like every other annual training, and people need to be tested out and actually accounted for. This will be something that OFCCP is going to look for, and this is what EEOC looks for as well. Your coverage, okay? Your online candidates coming in to be totally in real time, the best practice, the right thing, which all of us would want, is that you're getting service. And we don't have to wait for service, because most people who don't need an accommodation do not have to wait to apply to your jobs. But people who have disabilities who may need an accommodation, they have to wait, and maybe they'll get service. So we don't want that perception, right? So we need to provide 24/7 coverage. Now, you guys might cover, 8 to 9, or 8 to 6 at night, and then you might have someone cover the evening shifts. But I'm saying this is something very important to do for so many reasons I've talked about. Also, the voluntary product accessibility template. Again, I say that again from an accommodation standpoint, because any new software coming in need to make sure they're accessible. You can stop if you start the right practice in the foundation of your organization of anything new coming in, or anything that's going to be revised or redeveloped, or a different version coming out, they must follow the accessibility guidelines. And if they can't be accessible, there has to be a workaround of an accommodation. What is the accommodation? How are we going to make this happen so anybody can use this? Okay. So the benefits there, obviously, 24/7 coverage. You're going to limit any type of possible exposure. You're going to reduce your costs, potential costs. You're going to have better tracking methods in your recruiting efforts. It'll be in real time. The candidate experience is going to be immense. They've never had this service before. Can you imagine what it's going to say about your company? Saying, oh my God, they answered the phone. I couldn't believe it, and it was 11 o'clock at night, and they helped me, and I submit my resume. I can't believe it. You're going to increase your talent pool, the experience. You're going to have over-the-top customer service, right? You're going to be competitive, right? Although it's not a compliance issue to have 24/7, it's not. But from a competitive advantage and servicing companies or candidates in real time is huge. And I'm sure your numbers are going to go way up when you do that. Word gets out. Improvement on your voluntary self-ID form. Provide full access to your job seekers who need an accommodation. Your measurement reporting, evaluating outcomes. You're going to find out what partners are doing really well and sending you people and what aren't. It's gonna help you look at your recruiting strategy, what's working and what isn't, so that you can mold it and fix it and maybe add and delete to continue to move that needle forward to get better results. And of course, I've said this over and over again, excellent candidate experience. So let me give you a study on a company that actually implemented this with us. And in this case, this company had 500 employees. We just did the U.S., and we did a pilot. So this is a pilot. They didn't have their email set up when we started this pilot. It is up now, and we are servicing that. But in the first 3 months when we implemented this, the number of calls we got were 167. We got 17 submittals. The average call time was about 40 minutes. We didn't have any resources. Nobody came from a disability recruiting source, which I thought was interesting. We had 6 other recruiting sources, which I listed it out for the company, but here I'm not. And then we had 1 person that self-ID'd. So out of 17, 1 self-ID'd. So this was when we first launched this call center for companies, and this was our first results. So with that being said, I think we have some time. I want to thank you for participating today and having your time with me. I know it's precious, and I greatly appreciate it. So with that, I'm going to just leave it open to Sarah to see if there's any questions that I can help, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sheridan. We did receive a couple questions. I'm going to just dive right in. One of them is, you had mentioned accommodation calls should be recorded. And
no.
This person, okay, no. So this person was just asking to clarify that on what they had heard, and if that was or was not the case, it was how or what is best practice. I think they were under the impression that accommodation calls should be recorded.
Yeah, let me talk about that. No, I don't think they should be recorded. What I think what does need to be recorded. And I'm not saying recording as listening back to a voice of the conversation. Okay, so maybe it was my wording, and I apologize for that. What I guess the better word is a document. What needs to be documented are things that OFCCP is going to be looking at, right? And even EEOC. So you want to document that a call came in on the accommodation line, and I'd say document those calls. And if I go back, I'm going to go back on my slides. So these are the things that we document. Well, I don't even have all of it in here, but we document the number of calls that came in, the number of emails, how many of those calls did they actually submit a resume, or were they calls that we had to assist them on something? The average call time. Now, we did that because it's showing how much time does it take to assist somebody, because let's face it, in an accommodation, you've got to walk that person all the way through the submitting of a resume. So that does take time, and that's usually when companies are determining whether you want to outsource this piece. What's the value and cost? Is it cheaper to outsource or utilize our own resources? So we document that only for that reason, and that might be something you do. But from a compliance standpoint, I think it's important that you do get calls, how the calls are handled, what happened in the call, and did they actually apply, and did they fill out the self-ID form. So it just gives you some numbers and stats for your audit with OFCCP, but it's not a recorded session. I hope that clarifies it. And if it does, say yes. If it doesn't, ask something else in the chat box.
Yes, I think that really helps to clarify what you were saying, so thank you for that. The follow-up question is, where would you recommend storing that information? Is there any one right place, or whatever is best for the organization, certain folders, or with a certain department?
Well, I would say, how do you handle your accommodation process now? And is there somebody, obviously this is going to be in the talent acquisition recruiting area, and my guess is you haven't had that conversation yet. Or maybe talent acquisition isn't going to be handling that. You got to find out who's going to handle that, and how do you handle your accommodation data currently. And if you were to be asked by OFCCP about how many people have you assisted on your accommodation line, how you can pull that up. So obviously it needs to be confidential, but you're going to need to be able to pull that information out if asked. So I would guide you to your legal and accommodation folks on what's the best way that that information is stored, so that you have it if you were asked in an audit, et cetera, and also protecting any information that doesn't really need to be said or known by others.
No, that's really helpful, and I think that's a great point, just to challenge back and ask more about where is your accommodation statement housed right now within the website, and just another action item, but also who within the organization is in charge of that whole process. So I think that's a great call to action and a great response back. Another question is, so this whole topic was about accessibility and some great tips on what you can do to improve accessibility or even accommodation statements or processes. What departments do you recommend including in those conversations when you are trying to implement some of these changes, or trying to even have starting conversations on, hey, I feel like our site is not fully accessible, or maybe we just need to start doing some audits internally in order to evaluate that? Who should be included in those conversations?
Yes, that is a great question. So most of the time we work in silos, and we can't do that anymore. And I think we're learning that in a lot of different areas. So the people that need to be involved is your IT, your talent acquisition, compliance, HR, legal, even your risk management folks. Marketing. Here's the other thing. Marketing is out there with your brand, and yet they're not representing this population for the most part. So you got to have marketing and sales involved. Why sales? Because you may be assisting, I don't know if you're a B2B or B2G or B2C, but you're going to be assisting customers that may be a government contractor as well, or they may be servicing customers, out in the community. You got to bring your sales team so that they understand the importance of this as well, because you want to mirror your customer. You want to mirror your client of what their goals are, either from a compliance standpoint or a diversity initiative. So it does take a village. It does take a team. Also D&I, diversity and inclusion. You want them involved. A lot of the stuff that they've done with other groups might be a really good start foundation of how you can start doing more things as it relates with disability, and kind of have this foundation, but then have this overlay of how and what you can do with the disability population within the community or within your own internal offices. So it really does take a village. You can borrow dollars from each other, and you can really have a plan, but everybody really is involved. And I'll just make this one comment, is everybody has a laptop, and yet IT is not hardly involved. So, and same with marketing. Marketing's in charge of your website, right, and your brand, and yet they don't know anything about disability. We've left some people not coming to the table, so we really need to have a bigger table and bring people together and start educating them and helping them.
That's really helpful, and a great point as well, that we always say the more the merrier is how we phrase it when it comes to disability inclusion. Everyone should be involved in those conversations. But Sheridan, I wanted to thank you again, and thank you to everybody on the line who joined. We are right at time, and a friendly reminder that we are not sending out the presentation deck, but we did record today's training, and we will send that out as soon as it's available to everybody who did register for the event, including those who are not able to make it. So Sheridan, thank you again, and if there are any other follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to Sheridan or your dedicated account manager at Getting Hired.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks.